Oh, this was no boating accident. It wasn't a propeller, it wasn't a coral reef, and it wasn't Jack the Ripper. It was a 45. The 45 ACP Slugfest is one of my favorite kind of videos to make, and it doesn't get much better than this. Smith & Wesson M&P 45, Sig Sauer P320 45, full-sized. There's a lot to like about both of these guns. There's an incredible amount of similarity between these two guns, and obviously there's quite a bit of differences too. Don't look for a this one wins, this one loses type of conclusion at the end of this video, because I doubt very much there's going to be one. That's not what this video series is really about. It's about comparing and contrasting two different 45 ACP guns, and I try and couple them up into pairings that are very similar. However, it's not about picking a winner or a loser, although I will tell you as we go what I like and what I might not like about each one, and what I think maybe one does a little better than the other, or which ergonomics I prefer and why. So I'm going to try and give you some information in case you may be in the market for a 45 ACP. One of these or both of these might be on your list of consideration. I'll try and help you out with some information. I'll give you my opinion, and it is just an opinion, but mostly it's an excuse to bring two excellent pistols out to the range and shoot the heck out of them. So that's what I'm going to do. Now clearly these two guns have a whole lot in common. They're extremely similar, very, very similar. Very similar in almost every way except for a few key differences. So let's talk about some of those. I'm not going to give you all the specifications. I'll put that here on the screen. You can look at that for yourself. Basically, you're looking at two striker-fired polymer frame handguns, 45 ACP, both 10+1 capacity. The big differences are still small differences, actually. Barrel length is slightly different in favor of the SIG at 4.7 inches versus 4.5 inches for the M&P. Overall length kind of corresponds to that, 8 inches overall for the SIG and 7.5 for the M&P. Still very close. The weights are also similar, although according to their specs, they list them differently. 29.4 with a empty magazine for the SIG, 29.6 without a magazine for the Smith. So I may have to weigh them both to give you the differences, but still, the M&P is a little heavier than the SIG. They both have night sights in this case, SIG Light night sights on the SIG and 3-dot tritium Novak sights on the M&P. Now the Sig Sauer P320 45, certainly a newer gun than the M&P, so I obviously haven't had this gun as long, but it is already a favorite. It was a favorite pretty much first time I brought it out and shot it. It is quite a smooth shooter. I like the P320 platform anyway in 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson. So I had a pretty good hunch I was going to like it in 45, and I do. The ergonomics of this pistol are absolutely fantastic. And this trigger is amazing. It likes a little more of a 6 o'clock hold compared to the M&P, which is more of a point of aim, point of impact. But as long as I hold it consistent, I should get great groups. Same distance from the target, 10 yards. One big disadvantage is I have 3 magazines for the M&P, only 2 for the SIG. So I'm gonna have to go reload. Smith & Wesson M&P 45. It's the very first modern Smith & Wesson M&P that I bought a few years back. Still one of my favorites. Well, that was a whole lot of fun. Okay, stuff I like about the M&P 45 are almost everything, to be quite honest, but the ergonomics are extremely good in this pistol. Always have been. I've always loved the ergonomics. The one probably complaint I have, and that's a strong word, but the one thing I might change or have a wish list on will be that it be a little narrower back to front here. It's a little more flat and deep in its construction, which, you know, gives you a little bit less trigger reach. And if you got smaller length challenged fingers like I do, not that it's a problem, but could be a little more comfortable. Otherwise, you know, this thing, it shoots really soft. The sight picture is a good sight picture. It's a 3-dot tritium night sights on this particular gun. Gives you a nice sight picture. Not as great in the daylight as it is in lower light. 10-round capacity, of course. 10-round standard magazine. It's a stainless steel magazine. All the controls function perfectly, located conveniently. It's just a really nice, intuitive gun to hold and to shoot. The SIG Sauer P320 sort of has that X5 design going for it, and that's more apparent in the full-size version than it is in the shorter ones, just because, you know, it gives the pistol more room to take on all the shapes and contours. But this is a beautiful pistol. It's also extremely ergonomic. I'll talk more, I think, after you know, maybe get back to the workbench and talk a little more about the ergonomics of each pistol. But I think if I had to choose one, as much as I love the M&P, and I do love it a lot, I think I'm going to have to go with this one. A little shorter trigger reach, and the trigger itself is incredible. All right, where were we? All right, so I think with the M&P we went 30 to the body, 20 to the head. Might as well do the same thing with this. Make it same. Let's go up top. Ruh-roh, I'm out of bullets. All right, that was 30 rounds to the body. Just to finish off a box, let's do 20 rounds to the head. M&P 45. I'm standing at the 10-yard line, by the way. All right, let's see if we can tighten that up a little bit. Playing around. Yeah, it's more like it. That's more like it. Haven't shot this gun in a while, you know, like months, and you forget just how fun they are. Why I love it so much. This is a really, really super nice gun. One thing I noticed, the sights are also very similar. I'll show you those. One thing I noticed, shooting these two guns back to back and back and forth, is just how amazing this SIG trigger is. Yeah, the trigger on this 320 out of the box is extremely good, as I've said before. But boy, when you go back and forth between the M&P and the SIG, you really do notice it. As mentioned, both of these pistols are wearing night sights. The sight pictures are very similar, but let's take a look at each of them. We'll start with the SIG. And these are very traditional Sig Sauer SIG Light night sights, and you can see the 3-dot contrast sight picture there. With the SIG, the front blade is relatively thick, and it kind of fills that notch pretty well. That's actually my preference typically for a handgun. I like that front sight post to fit pretty well into the rear notch, and it does very well with the SIG. The M&P sight picture, as you can see, very similar. These are, again, also night sights, tritium. These are Novak sights, and the front blade is a little thinner on the M&P, and that gives you better accuracy when you need it, when you can take time to really center that front blade. But for quick acquisition, you know, I find it can sometimes be a little sloppy. So when I was doing my 25-yard shooting, you know, it's you have to concentrate more to center that front sight. But as you can see, very similar sight pictures. Sight profiles are a little different, although both sights do have a pretty good front ledge if you needed to charge the slide on a boot or a belt or a holster. Both of these sights will get the job done for you. Now another difference that's more subtle, it's not a specification, well actually it is a specification difference to a degree, but certainly a mechanical difference and a ergonomic difference is the trigger pull on both of these guns. Now this M&P 45 is a few years old, so it's still from sort of the era of questionable trigger quality with the M&Ps. If you're familiar with the M&P line, that should come as absolutely no surprise. The SIG P320 has a beautiful trigger. Out of the box, is one of my very favorites. But specification-wise, the M&P specs their trigger at, I believe it's 6.5 pounds, and SIG specifies theirs at about 5.5 pounds. So let's just take a quick look with the gauge and get an idea what the differences are. I'll do 5 pulls and we'll take an average, starting with the Smith & Wesson. Okay, so the average of the M&P 45 is 8 pounds 11.5 ounces. Okay, 5 pull average for the SIG, 7 pounds 11 ounces. So it's about a 1 pound difference on the scale, but as I try to always say, it's not about the weight necessarily, it's about the crispness and the smoothness of the trigger. And that's really a big advantage to the SIG too. I'm not even going to pretend that it's a closer battle than it is. This is one where I will call a winner, and then the winner is definitely the SIG when it comes to the trigger. P320 has a very smooth pull, very crisp break, and a very short reset. M&P has a bit of a gritty pull, a little squishy at the break, and the reset is longer but also less tactile. There are, of course, aftermarket triggers that actually I believe Apex now makes a Sig Sauer trigger, so there's aftermarket triggers from Apex for both of these guns. Long time M&P support from Apex. I'm always tempted to try one, I never have yet, but those are the differences in the stock pistols. Alright, so here's something interesting I want to show you. Perception versus reality for a minute. When I was out at the range, I spoke briefly about the ergonomics of the two pistols and in terms of the trigger reach, right? And I indicated that the M&P just feels like a longer trigger reach because, you know, it's a thinner, flatter grip up here and it feels like it's deeper front to back, and that was a longer reach for the trigger. The Sig Sauer definitely feels like it's a shorter reach. However, let's put a caliper on these, as I just did. So I already know the results, but I'm going to share them with you. Okay, so if I go from sort of the apex of the beaver tail here, or the grip tang, or whatever you want to call it, to the apex of the trigger. In other words, I'm trying to find the shortest distance and just get a good measurement there. 2705. Let me go to the M&P, and look, it just about drops right in place, and it's just as snug. 2707 is where that kind of came out to. So 2000s, yeah, boy, that 2000s, boy, you sure do feel that, don't you, at the range? So yeah, that's kind of an interesting example how sometimes our perception is not exactly sustained by empirical data. So as far as trigger reach goes, boy, these are exactly the same. Somehow for me, just because of the shape, the Sig Sauer feels shorter, but it's actually not. Both the SIG P320 and the M&P also offer a way to field strip the pistol without having to pull the trigger. That's a big deal for a lot of people, and I know for a lot of professional organizations, law enforcement organizations, and so on, that's actually specified as a requirement. Both of these pistols have a different solution to that requirement. So let me just demonstrate. Sig Sauer accomplishes that just sort of inherently with their removable actual frame, fire control group, whatever you want to call it, chassis that's inside. But to field strip the Sig Sauer, remove the magazine, lock the slide back, turn the ginormous takedown handle, and that's it. You don't have to touch the trigger at all. It comes right down. Okay. Smith & Wesson M&P also allows for field stripping without manipulation of the trigger, but they handle it a little differently. So we lock the slide back and remove the magazine. Yeah, I know I did that in reverse order, but it doesn't matter. Okay, now if you don't want to have to pull the trigger on the M&P, because right now it is charged or cocked, there is a little, let's see if we can see it. Let me point it out to you here. There is a little lever inside. It's yellow in color, but not highly visible, right there. And what you do is, using some tool or your finger, whatever you can reach it with, you push that lever downward, as I've just done. You can see it that way, sticking through there, just below the ejector. So by doing that, oops, forgot to use the takedown lever. Alright, so then the slide comes right off. Okay. If you don't want to have to use that lever, you don't have to. You still have the trigger option to decock the striker. So what you do is, again, rotate the takedown lever, let the slide come forward, but then in order to move it further forward, you're going to have to use the trigger to decock the striker. Either way is okay. Some people prefer the safety of using the little lever, which is easier to see here now. And some people prefer the simplicity of just using the trigger. Sight picture is a little different on the M&P. Front blade doesn't fill the notch quite as much, which means more room for finer accuracy, but also a little more room for error. If I got a choice between accuracy and error, you know where I'm liable to fall. I'm expecting, can't really see my hits from here, I'm expecting this will be closer to point of aim. Okie doke. Let's look real quick at the 25-yard accuracy results. This is the M&P. Again, 25 yards was the distance. Remington UMC ball was the ammo that I used in each gun. And this is the target for the M&P. M&P is more a point of aim, point of impact, because my hold was dead center here on the target. So you can see that actually what I did was I lined up my rear sights and my front post right there across that plane. So hits are pretty straight on as far as elevation goes, and the group was respectable certainly, but a little bit spread. The full 10-shot group is 5.282 inches. If you take away the worst, the 9-shot group is 5.128, so not a whole lot of difference made there. The best 5, 2.222, so that really brings things down, cuts it in half. And the best 3, 1.152, so almost in half again. Okay, now the P320 Sig Sauer, you can see for an elevation, my hold was the same. I was holding right here, dead center. So it's definitely preferring a 6 o'clock hold at 25 yards. But you can see it does have a tighter group. So again, same distance, 25 yards. Same everything, same ammo, Remington UMC, ball ammo, 230 grain. 10-shot group, 2.965 inches. Very, very respectable. 9-shot group, if you take away our furthest flyer, 2.731, so kind of like the Smith & Wesson. It didn't make a whole lot of difference to take away. We didn't have one distinct flyer that really gave us a bad group. Best 5 shots, 1.612, so that really produces a nice group. And the best 3, 0.656, just over a half inch, less than 5/8 of an inch. for the best 3 shots, and I believe probably those right there. So on that day, with this shooter, in those conditions, Sig Sauer produced a better group. Just looking at these 2 pistols, side by side, see they are very, very similar. Similar in size, similar in weight. Both have forward cocking serrations. Both have a rail system, although the Sig Sauer's is a little more proprietary than most of us would like. The height is about the same for both guns, as you can see there. They have different shapes. You've got the long and thin M&P and the sort of short and stout teapot of the SIG. Both have nice beaver tail area, great feel for the web of your hand to get up into on your grip. The SIG has that E2 type stippling, which is extremely good. I like it. I don't feel the need to put anything on it. The M&P, I do have a rubberized Talon grip on. 3/4 of it, part of it has come off in use, but that's been on there a really long time. So the M&P grip by itself, I don't care for as much. But with a Talon, of course, that evens the playing field. Takedown levers are similar and operate the same way, but the Sig Sauer, as I've griped about before, has this huge, in my opinion, way too large takedown lever. Nice and flush, unobtrusive, and somehow still functions. SIG, come on guys. Both have ambidextrous slide stop controls, see that. Both have a reversible mag release button. Reversible, by the way, folks, does not mean ambidextrous. People who say that drive me insane. It can be one or the other. Ambidextrous means both at the same time. So what else? I mean, that's really it. Just trying to let you guys have a look at these from all different angles. They are a lot alike in a lot of ways. You do have a more square trigger guard on the SIG with some serrations out front if you like that grip. M&P is a little more rounded and a smooth faced front. Better undercut on the trigger guard for the SIG than on the M&P. Well, there you go. I mean, those are the key differences. Okay, so what's the final word on these 2 guns? Well, either one, you know, is going to do you well. If you have preferences, if you happen to like Smith & Wesson M&Ps, then buy the Smith & Wesson M&P. If you like SIGs, buy the SIG. If you're like me and you like them both, then try and get each one of them in your hand and feel it. And if you're able to shoot them, obviously that's even better. But I'm telling you, you can't go wrong with either one of these guns. They are so similar in just about every way, even though fundamentally they may have a lot of key differences, like, you know, the SIG modular system versus the Smith & Wesson, you know, purpose-built handgun. But dimensions and shooting and all that, very similar. Now on my particular range day with this particular shooter, the Sig Sauer outperformed the Smith & Wesson M&P in terms of accuracy. But, you know, either one is certainly going to get the job done in terms of, you know, hitting your target. So if I had to choose today to keep one of these and get rid of one, that would be a tough choice. I would have a really hard time. I like them both a lot for a lot of the same reasons, and I like them both for some different reasons. They're certainly different pistols. They're designed differently. but they're so similar in so many ways. I'm glad that at least for now, I don't have to choose. I get to keep them both. So if things go according to plan and schedule, I'll probably be making this video public on Christmas Day 2015. So Merry Christmas. Unless maybe you're not watching this on Christmas Day. Might be the day after Christmas. Could be the week after. Might be the middle of July. But still, nothing says Merry Christmas like a slugfest of 245 ACP pistols. Am I right? But remember, there's no reason we can't pretend it's Christmas every day of the year. No, I don't mean all that, warmth and family and peace on earth and goodwill toward men and all that kind of stuff. I mean laying on the couch in sweatpants, binge watching your favorite TV series, and eating like you got a tapeworm.